Last year, I noticed something interesting in one of the vegetable beds. Not because I'd followed some complicated gardening chart, and not because I'd planted things in perfect rows. Actually, it was the opposite. The bed was a little untidy by traditional standards. There were flowers growing amongst the vegetables. A few self-seeded plants had been left in place. Some herbs had gone to flower, and there was a lot more life in that bed than many gardeners would probably expect. Bees, hoverflies, ladybirds, tiny wasps, spiders, the whole area felt alive. And yet when people talk about companion planting online, it's often presented almost like a magic trick. Plant this next to that, put basil beside Tom's, grow marigolds and you'll never see pests again. And honestly, I think that's where many gardeners become disappointed. Because companion planting is often explained in a way that sounds far more certain than reality actually is. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely believe there is value in companion planting, but probably not in the way many people imagine. I don't think nature works through single magical partnerships. I think it works through systems, through diversity, through balance, through creating an environment where many different forms of life can exist together. That's the important part. For example, one marigold beside one tomato plant probably won't completely stop pests. But an entire garden filled with flowers, herbs, vegetables, ground cover and biodiversity, that can absolutely change the environment. And over time it often does. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings in gardening is that people try to control nature too precisely, whereas nature itself is usually working through relationships, through complexity, through overlap. When you look at a woodland edge or a meadow, or even an old cottage garden, everything is mixed together, different heights, different root systems, different flowering times, different scents, and somehow it works. Not perfectly, but naturally. And I think that's where companion planting starts to make much more sense. Take carrots and onions, for example. That's one pairing many gardeners swear by, and there probably is some truth behind it. The scent of onions may help confuse carrot fly, and carrots may interfere with onion fly. Will it completely stop pests? Probably not, but could it reduce pressure slightly? Possibly. And sometimes that's enough. Not perfection, just balance. The same applies to flowers like nasturtiums and calendula. I grow a lot of flowers around the vegetable garden now, not because they look pretty, although they do, but because they bring life into the space. Hoverflies love them, pollinators love them, predatory insects love them. And once you start encouraging those insects, the garden often begins finding more balance on its own. That's something I've noticed more and more over the years. The healthier the ecosystem becomes, the less intervention is often needed. Now, of course, companion planting isn't always successful. Some plants genuinely compete too heavily. Large, vigorous crops can overshadow smaller ones. Heavy feeders planted tightly together can struggle. And if you cram too much into a small space, airflow problems can quickly appear. So this isn't about randomly mixing everything together and hoping for the best. There still needs to be observation, spacing, timing, experience. But I do think many modern gardens have become too simplified, too sterile, too tidy. We remove every so-called weed, we strip bare soil, we grow huge blocks of single crops, and then we wonder why pests arrive so quickly. Because from a pest perspective, we've created an enormous buffet table. Whereas biodiversity creates confusion, different scents, different colours, different habitats. And that's why I personally believe the real strength of companion planting is not individual pairings, it's biodiversity itself. It's creating a garden that feels alive. And interestingly, once you begin gardening this way, you often start noticing far more. You notice insect behaviour, you notice moisture retention, you notice soil life improving, you notice fewer extremes. The garden becomes less about fighting nature and more about working alongside it. And honestly, I think many gardeners are slowly moving back toward this way of growing, a calmer way, a more observant way, less about perfection, more about understanding systems, which is also one of the reasons I built Your Growing Companion, not to tell people exactly what to do, but to help gardeners notice patterns, to remember timings, to think ahead, to understand succession planting, crop rotation, seasonal changes, frost risk, what can follow what. Because gardening becomes much easier when you start seeing the garden as a connected living space rather than a collection of separate plants. And I think companion planting really sits inside that bigger picture. Not gardening hacks, not magic pairings, but learning how plants, insects, soil, moisture, weather and biodiversity all interact together over time. And personally, I think that's where gardening becomes truly fascinating. Anyway, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Do you use companion planting? Have you found certain combinations work well? Or do you think biodiversity matters more than exact pairings? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks very much for watching.